if you're trying to cultivate some empathy in your life, emotions are necessary.
In my head.
Hey there, I'm here in my orange light. It is not so windy out tonight, which is great. If you're new here, I usually go for walks at night and I talk about mental health topics, and tonight I'm going to talk about empathy, because empathy is something that people with personality disorders have difficulty with. I think it's a little misunderstood. I feel like I have at least a little bit of a grip of what it means to experience empathy and the psychological inner workings of it. You know, I wanted to make a mention that I base the things that I'm talking about in, things that I've read off of research, things that have been studied, but, I also inject some of my personal opinion into them, into what I'm saying, and I think that's clear. I don't think I have to preface every single thing I say with well, this came from a study and this did not come from a study, but I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not perfect, I'm not going to have everything correctly, and I think something that makes this channel unique and different from a lot of the other mental health channels is that I am kind of putting my own spin on things, and there are plenty of people who do that, and I love that. I love people talking and giving their experience and talking about what they're going through, because my channel is all about humanizing mental health, and what better way to humanize it than to just give your own opinions on things. So I'm going to talk about empathy tonight, and I hope you will enjoy. Okay, so I know I have to get used to people being around, but it's very awkward because I feel like I have to talk loudly for this phone to pick me up, and then it's like it feels like I'm yelling at my phone. I also have these headphones in, so I don't really know how loud I'm speaking. Yeah, I'm speaking pretty loud. And then, so when people walk by, I feel like I'm yelling at my phone and I look like a crazy person. I don't know. Anyway. Empathy. We misunderstand a lot of things about empathy. So empathy has different components, and it's not clear to us intuitively that it has different components, but it does. One component is cognitive empathy, and most people are pretty good at cognitive empathy. I know, unfortunately, it's famous that narcissists don't have empathy. That is not true. They do have empathy, and one area that they definitely are pretty well good at is cognitive empathy. And so cognitive empathy is when you're able to sort of know what is the appropriate emotion for a situation. So you kind of know, when people are making sad faces, that is a sad moment, or when somebody dies, for example, okay, that's a sad event, or when there's a celebration, okay, that's a happy event. That's cognitive empathy, being able to kind of intuitively know, logically, that a certain emotion is appropriate, or to understand from the context of what somebody's talking about that there's a specific emotion that goes along with that. Then you have affective empathy, which I think is the empathy we all typically think about, which is experiencing the emotional empathy within ourselves. So if somebody is bereaving a death, then maybe we see them bereaving that death and we feel bad for them, I guess is the way that we would normally put it. We feel it within ourselves. There's also what's called fantasy, which is when you feel emotions for a character, like a TV character or a character in a book or something. So it's not necessarily empathy for a person, but it's empathy for, I guess it's identifying with a fictional object kind of a thing and being able to feel it that way. And I know there's another type of empathy, but I forgot what it was and I couldn't find it when I was searching before I left. But I think it's also important to mention mentalization, which is the ability to kind of put yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's that ability to be able to look into how somebody else is experiencing something and get it and see through their mind what it might feel like. again, putting yourself in their shoes, it's having a theory of mind about them and understanding what may be going on for them internally. So being able to understand what their mind and their body and like what their experience might be like. So those are kind of like the core components about empathy. I'm going to talk about what gets in the way of empathy. Okay, hello. So I got a little water on my glasses because I was walking in a dark area past the sprinkler, and I was looking around for the sprinkler. I couldn't see it, but it got me. Empathy. Back to the topic of the day, because I tend to ramble here. I think that one of the biggest issues that people have with empathy is that they're defensive, and people are naturally defensive. You know, when things happen to us, we put up our defenses. When we don't trust somebody, we put up our defenses. When we feel like they're attacking us, as is often the case when we have some sort of mental disorder, we put up our defenses. But when you're defending yourself against somebody, you don't care about them. You're not empathetic towards them. You know, if somebody's coming at you with a knife, for example, to use an extreme example, you don't care about how they're feeling. You don't worry about like what their day was like. Like, that's not on the top of your mind. You're just worried about yourself and your life. And that same is true when it comes to when you're defending yourself against people, just in regular interpersonal interactions. So we have difficulty finding empathy for people who we feel like in some way are our enemies, or we feel like we're being attacked by them. And this is where it gets important that we have to treat our mental disorders. We have to be aware of the things that we think. We have to be aware of that narrative that runs through our mind. We have to be aware of the way things feel in our body so that we can catch ourselves if we're feeling defensive and question, is it appropriate to feel defensive right now? Sometimes it is. Sometimes you have somebody around you who truly is being a pain in the A, who is trying to harm you in some way. But if you feel defensive constantly around lots and lots and lots of people, there's a good chance that that's not regular, that's not normal. I hate to say normal, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. Unless you are in a population of people who are truly threatening, which is entirely possible depending on where you are, then, you know, if that's the case, then it's appropriate to not have empathy for people who are harming you. But if your general reaction to a stranger, for example, is to be mistrusting and to feel like they want to get something out of you, that's an indication that you're probably a little too defensive about things. You might have some issues with suspicion, with trust, and all that kind of stuff. So you can't have empathy if that's your interaction with people. And, you know, when we get into interpersonal relationships, especially close, intimate relationships, that can feel very threatening because it's expected that we're going to get vulnerable around people. It's expected when somebody's a close partner that they're going to know things about us, that they're getting deeply into our lives, and that could be a time when your defenses come up. But again, if your defenses are up, you can't be empathetic towards your partner or your close friendship or whoever is closely, intimately tied with you. So I think one of the biggest barriers to empathy is that defensiveness. And if we can just take a moment, breathe, give ourselves a chance to calm down, and then think about, is this person really trying to harm me here? Then we can stop some of that gut reaction of I need to defend myself and start to consider what's going on in their mind. Why would they say the thing that they said? Why would they do the thing that they did? And try to be empathetic to what's going on for them. So if you're a regular viewer, you already know about this, but part of these vlogs is documenting my own mental stuff, and of course I find a place to sit down. This happens to me just about every single night, and a car pulls up and they were not leaving. So I get very frustrated that there are no public spaces where I can have privacy, which I know public and private, they're opposites, so I shouldn't expect that. But I don't have privacy at home. I don't seem to have privacy in public, so where am I supposed to have privacy? That's very frustrating to me, so it is what it is, and we're gonna find somewhere else I can talk. Okay, we're gonna try this again. I'm on the main street. It's gonna be noisy. I kind of think it's gonna be impossible, but we're gonna see what we can do here. So, let me just think about what else I wanted to say. Yeah, I can't do this here. I gotta move. Okay, well, it's warmer out, so people are out tonight, and it doesn't matter if I'm in a parking lot, it doesn't matter if I'm on the main road, off the main road, it seems like there's just always people around. It's really hard for me to find privacy. Have I mentioned before how much I do not like where I'm living? This may be a good time to mention that I have a Patreon account, and if you want to support everything that I do here, that is greatly appreciated. You can get extras if you sign up there. Not needed, not necessary, but it would make my life a little bit easier. So that out of the way, and you know, I would like to actually do a video about money one day, so that's on my mind. But we're talking about empathy tonight, so let's talk about empathy. Let's see. I think people who have trouble with empathy, they're not in touch with their own emotions. I'm so sorry, the cars are whizzing by and I can't do very much about that sound. One more complaint. So, people who have trouble with empathy, I think they have trouble with emotions. And I think a thought that goes through the mind of many people who have trouble with empathy is that showing emotions is bad in some way, that being vulnerable is a sign of weakness, that people will take advantage of you, that emotions are only going to be used to manipulate you, to harm you in some way. And if you have that thought, obviously you're not going to want to show your emotions very often. But what people who, if you're trying to cultivate some empathy in your life, emotions are necessary. The only way you're going to feel what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, you have to feel that in your own body. And if you're not used to feeling that, it shows up in your body. Like, you'll feel, when you feel sadness, you'll feel like pressure behind you. Everybody feels a little differently, but generally, like, I'm going to speak how I feel things. Oh, it's so noisy. So you'll feel the pressure behind your eyes, you'll feel them start to get a little watery, you might feel like a sinking feeling in your chest, you might feel like some uncomfortableness in your stomach sometimes. That's like a sad feeling. You probably, even if you have trouble with empathy, you can probably understand the feeling of anger. So you get kind of like hot, and that's another feeling. You know, they're all valid feelings. I would just say, if you would like to learn empathy, to get in touch with those feelings in yourself, and maybe even if you don't feel comfortable expressing them to somebody else, express them in a journal. Maybe just take some quiet time and kind of like speak to yourself and get in touch with those emotions, because you're not going to have empathy without being able to feel emotions within yourself. It's necessary to have that component to be able to experience effective empathy for somebody else. Here's a big obstacle to empathy. A lot of people, when they hear somebody else being sad or angry, and this, you know, we all have, sometimes, like I mentioned, we all have defenses, and sometimes we all have issues with empathy. But if somebody's being sad around you, I tend to like look back to like, what were we taught in childhood? So what did your mother and father teach you about your own emotions? You may have been in an invalidating environment, is what it's called, where your emotions were not relevant. Your emotions didn't matter. People didn't want to hear about your emotions. It may not have even looked like a negative environment to you. You might have been showered with positivity, but within that positivity, were you able to express yourself is really the important question here. So sometimes if we're around somebody who's feeling sad, crying, we may feel like the attention is taken off of ourselves, and we may start to feel insecure, and we may not know how to handle somebody else's emotions. They may feel too intense and overwhelming, so we kind of shut down our own emotions because we don't think we can handle them. So I would say in that moment, maybe that's not the best time to practice empathy because your defenses are already up. But maybe if you could imagine yourself in a situation with somebody who's sad and imagine feeling empathy for them. Like when you're already in a safe environment, you're at home, whatever, and nobody's around, just imagine what would it be like to comfort somebody else? How would that feel? How would it feel for you? How do you like to be comforted? Imagine somebody comforting you, and then how would you translate that to comforting somebody else? And just imagine doing it in your mind. And I say do this somewhere safe so that you know it's not threatening because it's not even a real situation. And then maybe move on to like people you feel a little bit more comfortable around and start to show a little bit of that empathy. Practice it. It may not feel natural at first, and that's okay. But I think what's important to remember here is that you have that capacity in you, and once you get used to it, I think this is something that people who don't experience empathy regularly understand. It really enriches your life. Being able to feel all those emotions, being able to feel your own emotions and being able to have that extra component to your life, it enhances it and enriches your life. It's not a sign of weakness. And I should also mention, there's a lot of people who see people who express their emotions, who show vulnerability as a strength. They don't see that as a weakness. So what am I getting at here? I guess I just want to encourage you to try to learn. And you know, for some people that's going to have to be done with a therapist. You're going to have to practice it with a therapist. But if it's too intimidating to do it in front of a therapist, do it in a journal. Imagine it in your head. It's going to take practice if it's something that you're not used to doing. I remind you, you know, a lot of these things happen when we're in childhood and we are children and our life is very vulnerable, so we don't like that feeling. And if we weren't given the chance to learn how to express ourselves and be vulnerable and be safe with our parents, we carry that same feeling from childhood within us that we're not safe when we're vulnerable. So we're basically in the mindset and the body of a toddler, and that's a scary place to be when you're an adult. And that's why people often don't like it, and they shut down and they shut off those emotions. So I just want to explain, I don't know, you've probably already heard this before. I don't know what else I can really say, but it enriches your life. It's a good thing, and it's worth investing the time in. Oh boy, I'm in that spot where the shadow always comes above me. Okay, so I guess the last thing that I just would want to say about empathy, as I mentioned before, empathy across the board, there's difficulties with empathy in all personality disorders to varying degrees. Everyone's going to have different levels of problems because everybody's an individual. However, very often it gets attributed to narcissistic personality disorder, and I work on this channel to try to destigmatize the narcissistic personality disorder in particular, because there's a lot of bad information out there about people who have the disorder. So I think I just want to mention that a lot of times people who have been hurt by somebody who was abusive, who may or may not have narcissistic personality disorder, they get very insecure, obviously, and they feel hurt and abused or whatever they went through. I'm not saying that people don't go through horrible things. I've gone through horrible things. But then they turn around and they look at the other person and they blame them and they say, well, it's because they're a narcissist and they're a terrible person, and there becomes all this like angry aggression towards that person. And I am not at all saying that you have to have empathy for somebody who has harmed you, but when you have been harmed, just be aware that you're not going to have empathy. Sometimes that's appropriate, as I've mentioned. However, in the process of healing from things, sometimes you have to kind of let go of some of that anger and that frustration, and I do not want to be that person who's telling you to let go. You do things in your own time and you do things in the way that you feel is appropriate for you. But as you grieve, like grieving is the correct way, in my opinion, to get over these kinds of hurts and these turmoils. And of course, therapy is appropriate in many situations when there is abuse going on. And of course, removing yourself from that situation in the first place is appropriate. But there comes a part of your healing where you start to not have such emotional defensive reactions to things, and then that opens up the space for empathy. And what I have learned in my travels is that very often people who have narcissistic personalities sort of act narcissistically, abuse other people. I have been somebody who has abused people myself. They are doing so because that is how they were treated. It gets passed down because they have been in environments where that was acceptable, because their emotions were never allowed to be expressed. So they thought that was the way that you live, and then they passed that behavior on to the next person who comes after them. It's just the way it goes. So I think it's important for us to intervene in these situations and teach empathy, and that's something that I'm trying to do here, is to teach that empathy is possible. You can show vulnerability, you can show that you have emotions, you can say I'm hurt, you can cry, you can get angry as well. And so I just wanted to put that out there. It's important. What do you think about all of this? Are you somebody who struggled with empathy? Are you struggling with empathy right now? Let the community know. It would be a great help to everybody. If you like these videos, if you like mental health in general, I'm doing the whole YouTube spiel, but subscribe to me, please. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. That would be wonderful. And if you want to see my videos and make sure you get notified of them, click the bell, because YouTube has made a lot of changes lately. And you may not see everything unless you click that bell, so make sure you do that if you want to get all of my videos. I appreciate you for watching. I love that you're here and you're interested in your own mental health and you want to better your life. So thank you for that. Thank you for caring for yourself, and we'll see you next time.